Welcome to today's episode of the Lemme Splain podcast, where today we're going to be talking with Craig Clark, who is the Professor of Practice and Industrial Director at the University of Strathclyde. And we are going to be talking about the fact that Scotland does indeed have a space program, which most people don't believe me when I say that, Craig. But I have to explain, there is actually a very vibrant aerospace industry in Scotland. So Craig is going to walk through that with me a little. We're going to start with his experience and how he ended up working at the University of Strathclyde, and then have a great conversation about what the current state of the aerospace industry in Scotland is and where it's going. So thank you so much for sitting down with me today, Craig.
Well, it's a pleasure, Kathleen. Always happy to talk about how the space sector is going in Scotland and what we're doing. I think it's quite a fascinating story for most people because space is quite an interesting subject for most, even non-engineers. Everyone's interested in seeing things going into space on rockets and astronauts and different things like that. So it's just amazing to see what's happened in Scotland over the last kind of 15 to 20 years.
No, it's fantastic. And can you talk a little bit about how you ended up where you are today? Because if I remember correctly, you've kind of run the gamut between private, public, and then creating your own company as well, correct?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a bit of a long story. So if I start at the beginning, and I'll kind of rattle through it. But basically, I think it's always important to remember that, my background isn't from privilege. Not exactly kind of a very humble background, but not a privileged background. So I went to kind of a state school here in Scotland, with no expectations to do much really. Was the first person within my family to go to university. So I went to Glasgow University and studied engineering. Quite young. I actually graduated when I was still 20.
Nice.
So I was pretty young when I left university. I mean, it's a bit like, unlike the system in the US, it is possible to come through the kind of education system quite quickly.
Right.
So it was quite a thing. So I remember failing my third year at university because it was the only year I spent living away from home. So I basically slept the entire time, didn't attend any lectures, and failed most of my courses, and had to resit them all for the summer. I managed to pass them and I've done quite well, A's and B's, and then managed to get my honours degree in power engineering in the end of that. So I was quite lucky to do that. Then applied for loads of jobs in all sorts of sectors. I'd already been working in Hunterston Power Station, which is a nuclear power station in Scotland.
Right.
Prior to that, but just had like loads of different wee jobs of like maybe soldering things and for like an electronics company that was local, that type of thing.
Right.
Went for loads of different jobs, only got offered one, and it was with a company called Surrey Satellite Technology Limited. We're based down in Guildford in Surrey, which is near London. And obviously, if it was the only job I got offered, it was the only job I was going to get. So moved myself down to Surrey and worked there for 11 years. My girlfriend came down with me, got married, and we kind of settled down there. So basically really enjoyed working at Surrey. It was a great company, really pioneering the small satellite sector, one of the first companies in the world to actually build small satellites. So building satellites in a different way than you see all these massive satellites being built like by the likes of Boeing and Airbus and the big companies, Lockheed Martin's, where NASA and European Space Agency will put conditions on how these satellites are built. So they need to use like space grade components and all sorts of things. And the quality assurance processes are really, really strict. Small satellites give you the ability to do things differently. So you could use commercial components as long as what you do is kind of validate they would survive in space, but they're much cheaper, easy to get hold of, and easier to work with during assembly and things like that. So I learned a lot working there. Headed up the power systems team, And after about 10 years or so, my wife and I started a family. So I had a 1-year-old daughter. My wife was pregnant with my son. We thought we need to move back to Scotland to be closer to our families.
Mhm.
And when I looked at Scotland, there was no space sector. So there's no jobs. So I was really thinking, what do I do? I mean, I'd never thought of starting a business. So it was not actually in my head to do that. So I thought, well, after a lot of consideration and talking through it with my wife, we decided to use some of the money from selling our house, which we had bought in Surrey, to start our own business,
Right.
basically building power systems for satellites, for small satellites. And so started our business in Scotland and called it Clyde Space. It was called Clyde Space because Clyde is the name of the river that runs through Glasgow.
Yep.
At one point, back in the old, well, I think about 100 years ago, or maybe less than that, I'm not quite sure. But at one point in the past, about 30% of all the ships in the world were built on the Clyde. So shipbuilding is very kind of prominent in our history in Scotland, and especially in the Glasgow area.
Right.
So I thought, well, why don't we try and do the same for spaceships? Like, obviously not quite spaceships, but satellites. So that was the kind of the vision when we kind of first started. But I always thought if it didn't work out, I'd get a job and like, kind of have a normal career. But what you didn't realise is as soon as you start a business, that's you. You start.
There is no normal career after that.
No, there's no out. The only out is like when you exit the business, and the exit is there's two ways: either you sell the company, or the company fails. And there's no way you want your company to fail if you're a determined person like I am. So, so we started our business, and that was it basically. So, and I didn't know anything about CubeSats, so it's important that I mentioned CubeSats. CubeSats are a standard form factor. They're about a 10 by 10 by 10 centimeter cube, but you can get, so that's a 1U CubeSat, but you can get like 2U, 3U, 6U, and all sorts of different U's. So a 3U is like about slightly more than 30 centimeters tall, but still 10 by 10 centimeters in the other dimensions. And because it's a standard shape, it has a standard launch adapter for the launch vehicle, which means the standardization means that you can have standard subsystems that you can fit into these satellites. So I thought this is a great idea. I've seen it at a conference. I was at a small satellite conference in Utah. I thought this is a fantastic idea. And I spoke to, there's two people who are basically working on this at the time. This was back in kind of the mid 2000s. It was Bob Twiggs who had invented the idea, and Andrew Kalman from Pumpkin Space. And I spoke to them and I said, this is really interesting. And Andrew Kalman had been developing a computer and some structures and things like that for CubeSats, and he says we really need a good power system. So I said, well, we'll go off and do that. So we developed this power system. We were, I think, the first in the world to have an online shop. So we started developing different products for CubeSats, and we could sell them online through our shop. We started getting orders from credit cards and all sorts of things from all over the world, mostly from the US universities, but NASA and different DoD departments and different companies, Canada.
I love the fact that you had NASA's credit card.
I know, it's crazy. We would come in one morning and we just have an order for a satellite power system come through. Oh, we've had an order and the payments in the bank, from the credit card, which was amazing. So and I love the whole idea of that kind of creativeness and innovation behind doing something new and different. So, marketing was really important to me. So the branding was really important. How we came across to our customers, always doing a good job, always listening, always pick up the phone, always answering the emails,
right,
bending over backwards for them when they needed our help. And it was always nice to get an email back from a customer when they were thanking us for what we'd done for them to help them get their mission going and finished. Oh, so the screen went blank. So I was really enjoyed doing that. But if you talk to anyone that starts a business, we didn't have much investment.
right.
it's pretty tough. Cash flow is tough to run. I mean, we ended up with about 100 employees, and that comes with a different set of issues. With some great people who worked for us, but you do have, leadership is definitely key to running a business. No matter once you start getting to a certain size, and I would recommend that whoever starts their business really kind of understands what leadership is. No matter what type of business they're in, but communication and listening and just being part of the team and not locking yourself in a wee room and expecting everyone to just work there.
But it sounds like it worked out for you, man, because you built it out, you got it working, and you ended up selling it, correct?
That's true. So we did get a little bit of investment, and our investors wanted to exit. So we were approached loads by different companies. I won't tell you who they are because probably I probably weren't allowed to. But
yeah, man, don't tell me anything I can't legally know.
So we ended up selling to a listed company in Sweden. So they run a Swedish NASDAQ called AEC Microtech, who made subsystems for small satellites. And they're a lot smaller than us, but because they were on this, they were a traded customer.
They're publicly traded. Yeah.
They were able to raise the money to buy us. Nice. So they bought us and we became part of that group. And then they bought a few other companies as well. And now they're pretty much global. So that was basically my exit from the business, after maybe staying a couple of years.
Right. So there you are, footloose and fancy free and entrepreneurially successful. And now you're working over at Strathclyde, at least part-time. So what are you working on at Strathclyde right now?
So basically the idea was that, I got approached quite quickly after I left ClydeSpace to go and work at Strathclyde. And the reason I thought it was really interesting for me is it's not an academic role, because I don't think I'd be very good at that, to be honest, about teaching people. I don't think I've really got the patience to teach. And I've got loads of respect for people that do. But it was about helping the sector to grow in Scotland. And Strathclyde is a very practical university. They've got loads of industry connections. So Jim McDonald does a fantastic job of leading the university. He's extremely well connected into lots of different institutions and government. And we have some great facilities within the university to help companies to grow. So lots of spin-outs, lots of companies want to come and work with us at the university. And I just thought this is the place that I need to be to continue to help the sector grow. Because as I mentioned, when I started ClydeSpace, there was no space companies. Now there's over 170. We've had lots of companies that spun out of ClydeSpace. So people have left ClydeSpace and started their own companies. A lot of people have met along the way, have maybe been inspired a little bit to start a business, because a lot of people think they can't start a business until they see somebody else do it.
Right.
So I think that's also helped. But we've also, because we'll talk about this in a minute, but the government in Scotland really got behind the space sector. So Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish government, they seen it as an opportunity. They really listened to what the small satellite kind of revolution was doing, and they're backing it. So that's really helped to get inward investment as well.
And part of that, I think, from what you said, is also with the Strathclyde manufacturing aspect, with the advanced manufacturing that the Scottish government is helping you with. Is that correct? If I remember from our conversation earlier? That's
correct. So there's the things that I'm mostly involved in are working with the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District and the National Manufacturing Institute for Scotland. And we also have the Advanced Forming and Research Centre. So a lot of it's centred around, well, how can we build things better and differently? Are there better materials we can use? Can we be more kind of sustainable in our approach to building things? It's not just satellites, but medical devices and all sorts of things. But space is a big part of this. So we have some quite big companies involved and working alongside us, like BAE Systems and Babcock and the like, who are all kind of in the same area. So it's really exciting to have, and also Thales, I think, as well. So these big companies are based in the Glasgow area, we also have lots of these small businesses that need a little bit of support to get them to the next level, and that's where our researchers can come in and help them. And then you've got the inward investments, so companies that see what's happening in Scotland and think, well, we want to come there and work alongside what's happening, and they recognise that this innovation district is a kind of a hub for all of the kind of activity, and they want to come and work with us. So that's basically my job, is to make those connections and encourage the collaboration. I think collaboration is like vital. I think I always kind of view like industry as, it's not like little segments, it's the value chain. And research is a massive part of any industry, and it should never be forgotten, because if you want to continue to progress, and as humanity, if humanity wants to continue to progress and be more sustainable and improve like the lives of people on the planet, we need to research into all different aspects, and engineering is just one of them. So and manufacturing being part of engineering, so having research as linked into the value chain of industry is vital. So again, I see that as a very important part of my role, is to help link up industry with the research that's happening within Strathclyde and also other universities as well, because Strathclyde doesn't cover everything.
Right.
But other companies within Scotland and the rest of the UK that have strengths in areas that Strathclyde doesn't. So happy to connect them up to that too.
No, that makes sense, because I believe, didn't you say to me it's like 130 companies right now, approximately, that are working in and around under the enterprise and under the Scottish government?
That's true. So 170 is what I was told.
I was off, man. That's even better.
I know. And 8,500 people work in the space sector in Scotland now.
Which, considering Scotland's population, is not a small number. Like, that's not a small percentage.
People have said we're about a fifth of the space economy in the UK is in Scotland.
Yeah.
And it's gone from nothing in 2005.
And what was it that you were saying about vertical launch capability?
So this is another really interesting fact. Again, this is down to the UK and Scottish government kind of backing the sector. So we have at least 2 vertical launch sites in Scotland. Somebody told me, so we've got Sutherland, which is on the mainland. Right. There's only got one. It needs to do a dog leg when we launch from there, because it does go over the Faroe Islands. Right. But apparently we've got a deal with the Faroe Islands that we let them draw with us at football. Right. If we allow us to launch across their country.
Is that what it was?
I was kidding.
Who made, like, so clearly that was a whiskey agreement that someone made.
Yeah,
that was a handshake and a whiskey. That's how a lot of I've already learned that's how a lot of things get done here.
Yeah. But also Shetland.
That's what you got.
There's nothing north of Shetland, so we want to launch north basically because that's a polar orbit. Right. And sun-synchronous orbits are just slightly kind of retrograde, which means you launch slightly left of the North Pole. Right. Which puts you in a sun-synchronous orbit, which is what most Earth observation satellites launch into. And the reason they do that is so that they pass over the Earth at the same time every orbit. So it'll be like, say, 11 o'clock or whatever time they need for their instrument to operate best at. So if you've got, like, say if you're like midday, the sun would be right behind you, which means you get no kind of shadowing. So sometimes images aren't so good. So most of it maybe 10 or 11 o'clock. When they cross overhead. So they like that kind of sun synchronous.
No, and that makes sense. So the thing that most people probably don't realize is how much of the technology we use right now actually is dominated by small satellites at this point. So could you explain a little bit about that? Because I honestly, I had to have it explained to me. So most people just look at their phone and their phone works. You know what I mean? So what are small satellites generally used for, and how are they impacting most people's lives?
Well, they're used for so many different things, but I think most of the missions that I've worked on with small satellites have been Earth observation satellites. So the missions at SSTL and the missions from Clyde Space. So one of the missions I'm really proud of, apart from UQ1, which I mean, I've not talked about UQ1 yet, which was Scotland's first satellite, which was a Clyde Space mission, which is just a tech demo mission, so it had lots of different instruments on it. And we launched that in 2014. And after that, we really had an influx of companies and coming, including Spire Global and a number of other companies. It kind of kicked things off, really. It was a proof that we could do that.
It worked. Everybody else was like, great, let's do that.
Yeah, exactly. And, it really helped us to grow. It was so tough. I can't tell you how tough it was to get that over the line financially and from a technical point of view. We had a massive team of people just really dedicated to making it work. And, it wouldn't have happened without a lot of people within Clyde Space and the University of Strathclyde actually as a partner, really getting behind it and just working all hours to finish it. But anyway, it was a tough few years doing that. But looking at what these satellites are used for, so a lot of them are used for Earth observation, a lot of them are used for communication, and a lot of them are used for kind of technology demonstration missions as well. But what we're seeing, so one of the other missions I'm really proud of is one that we've done for NASA with the University of North Carolina, Wilmington.
UNC Wilmington, yeah.
Yeah, so they basically are involved in ocean color monitoring. So we done basically a 5 kilogram satellite for them with an imager that they developed, and it's taken loads of images, and they're great, really great quality from this tiny satellite, and it is equal to the quality of data that's coming down from much larger spacecraft from NASA. So they're really delighted with what they're getting back down. So it shows you what you can do. I think it's a real kind of great demonstration of what can be done with a tiny satellite.
So it's more mobile, and I would guess thus more economically viable for smaller programs to be able to get something up and get data, correct?
Yeah, it's quicker, cheaper to launch. Also kind of promotes innovation because you're saying, well, how can we fit this instrument within such a small volume, mass, low power, using different technologies with different sensors and things like that.
Right.
So you're really kind of, and I think that's the driver of innovation is really important, because I just feel that, I've not got anything against the large companies. I think it's really important to have the large companies because there is a need still for the big satellites.
Oh yeah.
Doing things, but large satellites take longer, much more expensive, which means they're kind of built in kind of the conventional way, the more traditional approach, like I mentioned earlier, with space grade components and with lots of quality assurance, and usually like a European Space Agency or a NASA or someone similar will be involved, overseeing the whole thing, making sure it's done
properly,
in their view, kind of thing. So it's with small satellites, you kind of throw the rule book out the window and say, well, actually, how can we do this? Still make sure it works, but take a different approach. And I think there's still a lot more we can do there. I think that if you look at Starlink, for example, what SpaceX is doing,
right?
They're throwing loads of satellites up every month.
They covered Ukraine in like a day. I mean, I know it wasn't actually a day, but they put that up fast.
Well, really fast. I mean, I'd love to see their production line. So if anyone from Starlink or SpaceX listening, and
I'll see if I can find anybody. I know I had a couple of people at Anderson that were SpaceX, so I could actually see if I am connected to anybody and see what I can do for you, Craig.
Yeah, I'd love to see what they're doing, because I think they must just have a production line of satellites going through and building them completely different to what people have done in the past, even different.
Have you ever seen the El Segundo? Have you ever been to the El Segundo campus for SpaceX or the California campus?
I've probably driven past it a couple of times, but
it's freaking enormous. Like I've been on camp. I haven't been inside it, but it's enormous. And so yes, it's entirely possible they just have a mechanized production line there.
Yeah.
Or in is it
Ours.
Texas? I think Texas is his other favorite place to be because of the lack of state income tax.
I can
But
imagine.
yeah, somewhere or other, Elon's probably got a factory just churning out the satellites at what is, let's be honest, a slightly frightening but very efficient rate.
Yeah, and also, I mean, how many people have you met that say, "Oh, yeah, I'm using Starlink because of reception from orbit. They can't access kind of normal, kind of wired like broadband or something like that."
Yeah, I mean, especially here in Scotland, if you're in Faro, if you know, Faro is beautiful, but a little bit remote, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people in islands use
Yeah.
Starlink.
The Arrens probably, what are they doing for Wi-Fi on Aran Islands, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
there's definitely I mean, there's lots of remote regions of the world that need. I mean, the satellites are used in pretty much every line of business. Now,
Yeah.
a lot of people don't realize that. You know, I mean, one of my good friends who started a company used to work for me at PlaySpace. He is using Earth observation data from existing satellites to basically support traders like of like small kind of coffee bean kind of like
growth.
plantations right where in South America to
Yeah.
trade directly with coffee like houses so they
Mhm.
can get it to them rather than using a third party, which means more money goes to them.
Yep.
And there's you can actually have this, what do you call it?
Fair
You know,
trade.
it's basically is you can prove where the coffee beans are coming from.
Oh,
I can't remember the word for that, but
provenance, I think it's called, just like wine.
yeah, yeah. So
In wine, it's called a provenance. I'm not sure what it's
is it?
called.
It's basically God, I can't. Basically, it's like a stamp to say this has got like
For real. Yeah.
validated that
This
it's come
is
from this
where
region.
it came from. Yeah.
Yeah. So, so I mean, and you can also like do things like calculate how much coffee's being made and like coffee beans are being grown in different parts of the world. Then you can estimate how much it's going to cost, and then
Right.
that's also good from a trading point of view. So if you're trading on a market, you know how much coffee is going to cost in the next year because you can see from this data and the algorithms that trading spaces in the company what they've produced can then use that data for. So it shows you like the different applications, and these are some of the companies we have in Scotland. They're not just making things, but they're using the data in a very innovative way to help different sectors with their like to help them to grow and do more. So they're also doing it for cocoa as well, so for chocolate.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so we know that you guys are, Scotland is, for lack of a better way of putting it, we've become a hub for putting up small satellites and really starting to develop not just the launch and the manufacturing of it, but also the applications of those.
Yeah.
So with that kind of, at least, if not established, at least in progress and growing, what are we looking at over the next 5 to 10 years for how the space industry in Scotland might expand? Where are they looking where there might be additional opportunities at this point?
Well, I mean, there's two things. I mean, there's a lot of discussion around this within UK government and the Scottish government. So UK government looking at the sector across the UK as a whole and looking at SMEs within the space sector in particular. So skills are a big issue. So the lack of talent. And I think this is an issue all over the world, at the moment, where, you want to recruit people, but, some sectors are growing faster than others. So it becomes difficult. So we need to encourage more of our young people into engineering and hopefully into the space sector. But I think really, in my opinion, the best way to improve the world and the lives of people is not necessarily politics, but to engineer better methods of maybe whatever it is, agriculture, clean water, power, sustainability, all that type of thing. So the more people we have doing that, the better. So it also means more people we can employ. So space is a great way of encouraging young people into study engineering.
Right.
So I think launch is going to be really important for that in the UK. Once people see rockets getting launched,
Yes.
which will be the next couple of years. You know, it's nice to see satellites getting built, but actually launching from the UK mainland and the islands surrounding it, that'll be amazing. The other thing is infrastructure. So we have lots of SMEs building, so we actually build more satellites in Scotland than anywhere else in Europe, which is an amazing statistic. But if we're going to continue to compete globally, because lots of other countries are recognizing that the small satellite sector is, you know, one of the fastest growing sectors in the space world. So they're investing heavily. So governments are investing heavily in the infrastructure required to help their companies grow to grow. But if you've got an SME and along comes an opportunity to build 100 satellites in a year based on the technology they have, most of these companies, I would say all of these companies, don't have that infrastructure available to them, and they wouldn't even be able to bid. So one of the things that we're looking at, hopefully going to do at Strathclyde, using the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation District and NMIS, is to put in place something called a zero capital factory, which would be like basically the ability to have a production line of satellites. So working, again, this is where research comes in. So the researchers would look at the current design of the satellites and say, well, if we build them in a different way, then we could mass produce them.
Right.
But using the same kind of designs, but just different kind of layouts on the boards and maybe different materials for the structures and things like that. But
Right.
that needs to have a different kind of a bit of a paradigm shift from the engineers. Most of the space companies, the design engineers only design one-offs.
Right.
And they love to change things because they're basically, that's how their minds work. Which is
It
great
almost
for,
comes down to making swappable components.
yeah.
It's like
Well,
equivalent of what we have for car tires now.
yeah,
Certain
exactly.
cars, certain sizes, maybe start to make components for satellites that are more standardized.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a bit like what Henry Ford did to the car industry. You know,
Yep.
you know. So we need to like take a different approach. So take that out of the hands of the kind of innovative designers and put it into the hands of the manufacturing engineers.
Right.
So and for that and for them to be able to bid and to win contracts to build the hundreds of satellites, they then need to have access to the facilities to do that. So we're putting in place something that allows them to do that will be critical. The other thing is investment. So recognition from the investment community that, you know, Scotland and the small satellite sector in particular is a good place to invest at the moment because of the growth of the sector and the opportunities there. So getting them involved in conversations with the likes of myself and colleagues within the Scottish space sector to have a look at what companies that are wanting investment to help them to grow and to basically support, you know, the growth. I mean, we see this a lot in the US. The US is companies, there's a lot more money in the US from an investment community perspective. And it's more difficult to get investment in Europe than it is in the US.
Yeah, we're cowboys like that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Sorry about that, man.
Yeah. I mean, it's working.
It's working. We just have to maybe get a couple of the cowboys to come over here and give you some of their money.
Absolutely.
But I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like I said this to Alistair when I talked to him about the overall tech innovation district. The part of it, I think, is like you guys have done a great job out here, but nobody seems to know about it, which was amazing to me. Because when I looked at coming here, I had multiple people who work in the tech industry with me go, "Work in tech? Why are you looking at Scotland?" I'm like, "You need to Google, dude. Like, have you seen what they're doing?" So I think it's just a matter of helping people to have a bit more awareness that there is this growth.
Yeah.
But it sounds like you're creating several really great distinctions that makes kind of Scotland work for space. If someone was interested in learning more about the space industry in Scotland, where would you suggest that they start?
Well, I mean, gosh, I mean, there's so
Right?
much.
Exactly.
Well, I think general, there is a Space Scotland website, which I think is spacescotland.org,
Mhm.
which has like a basic kind of top level overview. There's a number of um, kind of podcasts and different videos from different companies and also I think from Space Scotland that may be worth having a wee look at.
Mhm.
Um, I think that could be a good starting point, really. Also, Scottish Enterprise and the Scottish Development International have some information on the sector on their website, which is quite easy to find. There's on the Space Scotland website, there's things like the Scottish Space Sustainability Roadmap, and we were the first country in the world to actually publish, we actually produce a roadmap for sustainability for space.
Right.
That could also be an interesting place, but we also have a strategy, again, which will kind of give an overview of our current position and companies and the like.
So one of the things that I actually like, because Scotland does have a huge emphasis on sustainability, but I also found it a little bit amusing that small satellites are inadvertently inherently sustainable, because
Yeah,
when they're done, they just burn up.
yeah. This is my view, and I actually spoke with somebody the other day who was like questioning it because we still don't quite understand what if you were to whenever a satellite re-enters into the atmosphere, it leaves a lot of its material in the atmosphere. And, we,
Mhm.
and this person was saying how we don't know how damaging that could be. But my view is that the smaller the satellite, the less material, no matter what material it is, there's much less of it. Uh,
Mhm.
so therefore, it will be less left in the atmosphere. There will be nothing coming through that will land in our heads, which is great.
Yeah.
Um, you know, big bonus there. Um,
Less chance of head injury from satellite. Got
yeah.
it. One less statistical worry to have. Cool.
But also the thing that
Now
I
I just
love
have to worry about the Sharknadoes, but I don't have to worry about satellites. Good to know.
yeah, exactly. And I think the other thing that I kind of think, I think sustainability is really important, and we need to be aware of this. And I think that's more of a materials, like coming back to the manufacturing aspects. Let's look at different materials, different ways of making things, so that we can ensure that it is a sustainable method. But I think the whole idea of launching into a low enough orbit where you do re-enter within a kind of 5 to 10 year time frame, which is quite short for most satellites. A
Right.
lot of satellites that are in orbit are up there for, a very long time. And in many cases will never come down.
Right.
Um, so I think that if you've got such maybe a shorter life of the spacecraft, then you look at the speed of innovation and technology. One of the kind of great examples I use is my wife came into my wee home office here and she said to me, "I thought you bought a new computer." And I said, "Yes, it's just sitting there." She was like, "Where?" I said, "Right there in front of you." She's, "That's not a computer." And I said, "It is. There's this tiny box." And I'm like, it's the best computer I've ever had. It's the fastest, most powerful. But she just couldn't believe it. So the pace of change in technology has been quite incredible. Space has not been it's not been very good at kind of exploiting that because of this need to stick with space grade components, which typically aren't at the cutting edge, whereas small satellites can take advantage of it because we can say, right, well, low Earth orbit, it's not. There's two things that affect you mostly in low Earth orbit. There's a little bit. So there's two things that you need to worry about. First thing is kind of low energy particles, so like kind of radiation, low energy radiation that will build up as a charge within your electronic devices, which will eventually stop them from working.
Mhm.
And that's a bigger problem in higher orbits, not low Earth orbit. But in low Earth orbit, you've got high energy particles, which will cause like single event effects, which typically kind of manifest themselves as like kind of an overcurrent situation. So it could be in like an FPGA or some sort of computer chip, or or a MOSFET or something like that. So it can cause extreme damage, but you can design for that. You can also choose components that are less susceptible to it. So we have this ability to access much more advanced technologies. So if your satellites are up for, say, 4 to 5 years, every 4 to 5 years you're replenishing with a much more advanced technology because of the pace of change of technology. So your service, whatever that service is, whether it be Earth observation, telecommunications, or some form of position navigation and timing, that's more advanced if you're in the military, because the military is a big issue with jamming and for GPS, at the moment, that type of thing, or some other application. So you're constantly being able to replenish that service, because your previous generation of satellites are just about to re-enter, and you're chucking a bunch more up using the many launch vehicles that you can access now, because we've got lots of opportunities to do that too now.
Awesome.
So I think it is sustainable just by virtue of the way that the sector has evolved,
which is great.
Yeah.
So I love that there's so much growth coming, and quite honestly, I will probably bother you again to come and talk to me more about this. But we are starting to run out of time. So for everybody that has listened, we will get the links from Craig with regards to all of the different companies and all the different resources that we discussed, and they will be in the show notes for us. But in the meantime, thank you very much, Craig, for coming in to sit down with us. And I look forward to talking to you again soon.
Okay, no problem. Hopefully your transcriber has understood my accent, okay? And all your listeners in the US can understand me.
It's fine. I will fill in anything else. I've lived here long enough. It doesn't bother me.
Yeah. I was, if you've got like 2 seconds more, I was flying back from London on Tuesday, and there was a bunch of kind of travelers from the US who were coming up to Glasgow, about to board a flight, and they were asking, like, somebody from Glasgow says, I'm just on the, I'm not going to try to attempt a US accent, but he did say, I'm on my way to Glasgow. And the other guy just said, it's pronounced Glasgow. Just think Glasgow.
There is a very famous TikTok, and I am totally going to swear in this, but there's a very famous TikTok of a guy who, very kind of posh influencer type, and he must have been taking footage of himself. He's like, hey, here I am today in Edinburgh. Like, he just said it wrong.
Edinburgh, I think you said.
Right, Edinburgh. Yeah, you've seen this? And from the side, you hear some Scottish go, it's Edinburgh, you fucking idiot. I'm like, yeah, that's Scotland.
He was just walking past in the background.
Yeah. Oh my God, it was one of the funniest things when I first moved here, because we all have customer service so inherently drilled into us in the US, right? So I am so used to saying to somebody like, hi, how are you today? Like that, because I did so much retail and customer service, it is a reflex for me, even though I'm not even behind the counter anymore, right?
Yep.
And I showed up, and it was in the West End, and I said to somebody, and just automatically, I'm like, hi, how are you today? And the cashier dead looked at me. She's like, honestly, I'm a little friggin' hungover, but it's getting better as the day goes by. Yeah, I love this country.
Yeah, nobody will.
Yeah, no, they'll just be honest with you, man.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good thing. That people are just honest.
I think it's hilarious. There was another girl that, like an American girl, where she was behind the counter at a coffee shop, and she and I talked for like 2 seconds, and I looked at her, I said, oh, you worked at Disney, didn't you? And she's like, yeah, I did. And her Scottish coworkers looked at me like, how can you tell? I'm like, there is American customer service. I said, then there is Disney park customer service. I'm like, don't tease her. She's been brainwashed.
Yeah. Well, I went to New York for my 50th birthday, and tell you what, the New Yorkers are very different people.
As somebody who is originally from Long Island, yes, we are. Like
Yeah.
when I moved to California, I had to unlearn a lot of East Coast habits.
Yeah, that's true. But
One
you
of the
still,
Oh, it's amazing. Like I
Yeah.
saw somebody sent me the clip the other day. It reminded me of it because I was born in New York and then was raised north of Boston. So I have like both linguistic bad habits of the Northeast. And Matt Damon was talking about the fact that when they did Good Will Hunting, which famously took place in Boston, they got feedback from the studio that they couldn't make it into a PG-13 movie because they had 148 instances of them saying the word fuck. Because because in the Northeast, that's like a comma. Like
Yeah.
it's right? And
Yeah.
I saw that and I was like, that makes me feel so much better about how I had to untrain myself from swearing when I moved to California.
You get quite a lot of that here as well in Glasgow.
Oh yeah, you guys are not helping me. You're not helping me.
It's a filler word for a lot of people, and it's I totally, I'm used to it.
Let's do it. Yeah. On that note, because we did accidentally record that whole thing, thank you very much, Craig, for the satellites and the fun cultural exchange. And
Okay.
we will talk to you soon. And thank you for today's episode of the Lemme Splain podcast.
Yeah, no problem. It's my pleasure.